Hello and welcome to What the Headcrab, Epistle 3. I'm assuming that you know what's happened. It's all over the internet. If you haven't, here's a very brief summary. 2 days ago, on Friday the 25th, Marc Laidlaw, one of the writers from Valve, released on his blog something called Epistle 3, which is a story that was written about Episode 3. Now, Tyler from Valve News Network broke the news to everybody, and Jacathan changed the names. Now, in Mark's original blog, he didn't use the names of everything, which opens up a question, which we'll come to later. He used Gertrude Fremont, for example, instead of Gordon Freeman. Now, Jacathan changed that to make it easier to read. I am not going to spoil the story. If you haven't read the story, there is a link in this description, or the description of this video. You can read it or not. It doesn't actually make any difference. So people have been asking me what are my thoughts, and I've been saying no, none, haven't got any thoughts, because I wanted everything to sort of settle down. So this video is going to be talking about some of the effects on the community, specifically the modding community, and some questions I have. I'm not going to be doing a detailed analysis of everything that's happened since Mark published the blog, partly because, for example, just on the Half-Life 3, just on the Half-Life subreddit, there's probably 30 or 40 different threads about this topic, some of them with like 1,000 comments. So Tyler from VNN, Valve News Network, is probably better able to do a video that summarises the story itself and all sorts of things. His video was really, my God, people, just in case you didn't know, this has just happened. So I'm not going to do a detailed analysis. I'm going to give you some questions that I've got in my mind that you might have in yours, and talk about how it will affect the modding community, because that's where my interest lies. So what have we got? Well, the first question is, when was it written? Because I think that that's important for me. If it was written just after episode 2 or around episode 2, then it has more credence for me, because that's what they were planning. Now, a little bit earlier I said it's a story. It is a story. Now, Mark, I think, was surprised at the community's response, which generally has been quite negative. It's been like, oh my God, Half-Life 3 is never going to happen. Everybody crying and using phrases like, this is where I get off, and all of that. And I think that's a little bit silly, because he's just saying, and there's lots of tweets about it, saying this is a story. And the phrase he uses, this is a sketch. It is a map of the territory. It is not, this is what we were going to do. This was basically our starting point. And I want to take this opportunity to talk about how those stories have developed in Half-Life, because we need, as a community, to remember that when Valve made Half-Life, they did not have a complete story idea. They didn't even know who the G-Man works for. They haven't thought about those things because it doesn't affect the game. And what's important is that when they made the first Half-Life, they didn't think about the Combine. They didn't plan for the gravity gun. The engines and the ability of the engines defined what happens in the games. And I think that that's really important. And that's why we haven't had Half-Life 3, which we'll come on to. So what we need to understand is that there has been no story that has been hidden from us. It's just organic. It develops as it goes, and I'm okay with that. I've been a vocal critic of Valve, not for the games that they've made, but for the way they've treated their fans, and I think that I want to reiterate that now. I think that they've treated the fans really badly. If you're not working on the game, just tell people. Just say that we started. I just think this cloak and dagger secrecy is really bad. I think it's treating us fans really badly, but it's their company and they can do what they want. So when they started making Half-Life 2, they had the new engine. Okay, well, now we can do some graphics, some physics. Well, what do we need to do physics? We need a gravity gun. A gravity gun, fine. Oh, well, we need beautiful locations because we can utilize the graphics engine. Half-Life didn't have beautiful locations because it didn't have a great graphics engine. So that's what we've got going on here. We have a story that was written perhaps 10 years ago, or we have a story that was written now just to give some closure. Now, the story is beautifully written. I've read it and I enjoyed it. It's not necessarily the best story I've read as a possible conclusion for the series. It's just one that comes from somebody who knows more about it than we do. So the community needs to stop pulling their hair out and saying, oh my God, episode 3 or Half-Life 3 is never going to happen just because we have this story. The second question I have, besides when was it written, is did Valve know that Marc was going to release this? Get the feeling that they didn't. And there's kind of been talk on the internet, and I don't know how true this is, that an NDA has expired. Now, an NDA is a document which stands for Non-Disclosure Agreement. It means that you sign it and then you can't talk about the thing that's covered by the NDA. And people have been saying that the NDA finished at some point in 2017, which is I suppose now, so that people were allowed to talk about it. I don't hold much credence for that. Partly because all of the names have been changed and that might not have been related to anything to do with the NDA. But if it is, then why bother? Why not just say this is what we had planned? And I don't think that NDAs have specific periods. I have signed an NDA before and I don't remember any particular date. No, I have not signed an NDA with Valve, okay, so don't even think that. I'm just saying that I have had some experience with that and I don't remember any date when it expired. I'm not allowed to talk about those things ever. So I don't know whether that makes any difference. But if Valve didn't know about it, how do they feel about it? I can imagine somebody being pretty upset, or they don't give a monkeys. Because this is just one potential story. Maybe they don't care about it. There's nothing in the story that fixes them to a particular type of idea. And the story is just that. There's no details about the gameplay. We can make some inference from that, but there are no, this is how it's going to work. And I mentioned that Marc had made that tweet about the sketch. And essentially, we just need to calm down and relax. Now, I talked earlier about the Half-Life 3. I believe that Half-Life 3 will eventually be made. I believe that they should have made an episode 3 using the same engine as episode 2, tied up some of the questions that we might have had related to that, and then left some more open for Half-Life 3. And I'm pretty annoyed that Valve didn't do that. I don't think the community had to have something so amazing. We just wanted answers to some of the questions, which is why this has blown up so much in the community, because it answers some of our questions about what would have happened. And that's what we always want. We always want to know what would have happened. My belief is that Valve are waiting for a big jump in technology before they release, or before they even take any serious strides towards making Half-Life 3. For example, I am totally obsessed with liquids. I would love to see more liquids in games, and real liquids that can freeze, liquids that can steam. There's probably so many interesting things. Another area that I'd like to see is much better AI. And I would like to see a game where the outcome doesn't change based on the AI, but how you get there does. So that each time you play it, it's different. Anyway, maybe that's me projecting my ideas. But clearly the big technology that's in front of us at the moment is VR. And I would not be surprised if Valve are waiting for VR to become a little bit more mature and then they release it as a VR product. Now, initially, I didn't think that Valve would do that. I thought, no, they won't alienate some of their people. But by the time they release it, most people might be using VR. And VR would be a big enough technological jump to justify releasing a new game. And that's how those games have been released, let's not forget. When Half-Life was released, it was technologically superior to other games. Yes, it was built on the Quake engine, but it had things that the Quake engine didn't. Source was a significant jump from Gold Source, and I think that Source 2 or VR Source or whatever it will be called will be a significant jump to those things, to those previous iterations of the engines. So that's my feeling on the eventual thing. Now, the community has been talking about, oh my god, now we have the story. No, not the story, a starting point story. Now that we have the story, let's make it ourselves. I don't think that's going to happen. Somebody has already made it. Leon has already made something called Half-Life 2 Episode 3 The Closure, which was his interpretation of it. Some people loved it, some people hated it. I don't particularly want the community to make this story into gameplay. I don't mind if they do. I prefer that they make their own stories, and that's what I love about the modding community, is that they take it and they take different routes and different ways, and if they want to do that, that's great, but this is a big project, and I think that the community in general struggles to get large teams together to make something that's focused only on the team leaders. I could be wrong. Maybe there's a bit of reverse psychology in my speech. I'm trying to get people to make it. I don't know. It has been suggested that the Crowbar Collective, perhaps when they finish Zen, move on to it. Now, I like that idea because they clearly have a history of working well together. They can make a product and they can ship it. Maybe they could do that. I wouldn't be against that. But the community needs to stop worrying and saying, oh my God, it's the end, we're never going to get it. And they need to stop saying, we have to make it now. We don't have to make it. Make your own stories. I love the stories. There's lots of really interesting mods out there built around the Half-Life universe, and some of them outside of the universe as well, that are really interesting. Don't worry about finishing the story, because for some people, that's all they wanted. They even wanted a cartoon or a comic just to see where they would go. And it's one possible ending. Without giving you any spoilers, it opens up more questions than it answers anyway. It doesn't really solve anything. So it's not as if it's a beautiful end to the story arc. No, it's just the end of the potential of episode 3. So there you go. I know lots of people have made videos and about this kind of thing, and hopefully, you know, this would have been of interest. If not, okay. Do your research if you want to. It's all over the internet. Read the story if you want to. Honestly, I think you should read it. I don't think it spoils anything for you. And that's it. This episode is finished. Tell me what you think. Do you think that it was written back in the days of episode 2? Do you think Valve knew about it? In fact, while I remember, Jeff Knightley, who's kind of like a reporter who has very strong connections, he tweeted that he says, my gosh, I didn't think it would be somebody else who wrote the final hours of Half-Life, giving the impression that he didn't know about it. Maybe it's an elaborate marketing ploy to introduce, you know, the announcement. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments. Tell me if you've got any questions. Do you think Valve know about it? Is Gabe angry? Do people at Half-Life, at Valve care? There's an interesting discussion about the shipper thesis, which is the idea that at some point, everybody at Valve who made Half-Life will be gone. And that Valve will be different anyway. Do they care what people are saying or what story? I don't know. Tell me your thoughts, and that's it. And remember, finishing Half-Life is just the beginning. See ya.